Sarah Johnson stood at the front of her church's community hall, arranging chairs for the upcoming outreach event. Her dark hands moved swiftly, making sure each seat was perfectly aligned. At 32 years old, she had been the gospel tour director at New Hope Baptist Church for the past 5 years, and these monthly community gatherings were her favorite part of the job. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting warm patches of light across the wooden floor. Sarah hummed softly to herself, a habit she'd had since childhood. Her mother always said she sang before she could talk, and music had remained her constant companion through life's ups and downs. As she placed the last chair, people began filtering into the hall. Sarah greeted each person with her bright smile, the kind that made everyone feel welcome. She noticed unfamiliar faces among the regulars, which was exactly what these community events were about, bringing people together. Then she saw him. Near the entrance, a man in a wheelchair was struggling slightly with the door. Without hesitation, Sarah walked over to help. "Let me get that for you," she said warmly. The man looked up, and Sarah found herself looking into the kindest brown eyes she'd ever seen. "Thank you," he said, his voice deep and gentle. "I'm Marcus Thompson. This is my first time here." "Welcome to New Hope, Marcus. I'm Sarah Johnson, the tour director." She noticed his military veteran cap and the way he held himself, proud, but not rigid, strong yet humble. Marcus wheeled himself into the hall, and Sarah walked beside him, matching his pace. "So, you're the tour director? I heard the singing from outside last Sunday. It was beautiful." Sarah smiled, pleased by the compliment. "Do you sing, Marcus?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "No, but I love music. Used to play piano before." His voice trailed off, and his hands gripped his wheelchair's armrests a little tighter. Sarah noticed but didn't press. Instead, she said, "Well, we're starting a new music appreciation group. We meet on Thursday evenings. You should join us." Marcus looked surprised by the invitation. "Really? You'd want me to?" "Of course," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm but kind. "Music is for everyone. Besides, we need more people who truly appreciate good gospel music." The event began, and Sarah had to leave to lead the opening psalm. As she stood in front of the group, her voice rose clear and strong, filling the hall with joy. She noticed Marcus watching intently, his eyes closed sometimes, feeling the music. During the refreshments afterward, Sarah found herself drawn back to Marcus. They talked about music, their favorite songs, and their lives in the community. She learned he had been in the military for 8 years before a spinal cord injury changed everything. But what struck her most was his positive attitude and the way his face lit up when talking about music. "You know," Marcus said, sipping his coffee, "I still compose a bit. Nothing fancy, just melodies that come to me sometimes." Sarah's eyes widened with interest. "You compose? That's amazing. You have to show me sometime." For the first time that evening, Marcus looked uncertain. Most people don't really. They see the wheelchair first, and everything else becomes secondary. Sarah pulled up a chair and sat at eye level with him. "Marcus, I see a music lover who composes songs. The wheelchair? That's just your mode of transportation." Her words seemed to touch something deep within him. His eyes grew misty, and he quickly blinked. "You're different, Sarah Johnson. You know that?" As the evening wound down and people started leaving, Sarah helped Marcus with the door again. "So, will I see you at the music appreciation group on Thursday?" she asked hopefully. Marcus looked at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You know what? Yes, you will." Sarah watched him wheel down the ramp, her heart feeling unusually full. Something about Marcus Thompson touched her soul, and she had a feeling this was just the beginning of something special. That night, as Sarah got ready for bed, she found herself humming a new tune. For some reason, it reminded her of kind brown eyes and a gentle smile. She didn't know it then, but this was the first chapter of her greatest love story, one that would change her life forever. The Thursday evening music appreciation group became the highlight of Sarah's week. She would arrive early to the church basement, arranging comfortable chairs in a circle, making sure to leave a perfect space for Marcus's wheelchair. As she set up the old CD player and sorted through gospel albums, her heart would beat a little faster knowing he would soon arrive. Marcus never missed a meeting. He would wheel in precisely 5 minutes early, usually carrying sheet music in a worn leather bag on his lap. Sarah noticed how other group members initially kept their distance, unsure how to act around him. But Marcus's warm personality and deep knowledge of music soon won them over. One evening, after everyone else had left, Marcus hesitated by the door. "Sarah, would you like to see some of my compositions?" Sarah's face lit up. "I thought you'd never ask." She pulled up a chair next to his wheelchair as he carefully removed several handwritten music sheets from his bag. "This one," he said, pointing to a piece titled Morning Light. "I wrote it when I was still in the hospital. Those first rays of sunlight through the window meant I'd made it through another night." As Sarah read through the notes, she could almost hear the melody. Without thinking, she began to hum it softly. Marcus stared at her in amazement. "You can read music that well?" "Music is my first language," Sarah laughed. Then, more seriously, "Marcus, this is beautiful. Would you let me perform it with the chore?" Before he could answer, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was her sister, Lisa. "Sarah, are you still at church with that man in the wheelchair? You need to come home. We need to talk." The warmth of the moment faded. Sarah knew that tone. Since she'd mentioned Marcus to her family, there had been whispers of concern. "He's different," they said. "Life will be harder. Think about your future." That Sunday, after church service, Lisa cornered Sarah in the kitchen during family dinner. "Sarah, baby, we're just worried about you. Dating someone with his condition, it won't be easy." Sarah put down the dish she was washing, turning to face her sister. "His name is Marcus, Lisa, and he's not a condition. He's a man with more talent and kindness in his heart than most people I know." "But what about children? What about taking care of him? Have you thought about all that?" "I'm thinking about getting to know an amazing person who makes me smile," Sarah replied firmly. "The rest will work itself out." The next Thursday, Sarah noticed Marcus seemed quieter than usual. After the group left, he finally spoke up. "I heard some people talking after church on Sunday about us, about me being a burden." Sarah felt her heart ache. She moved to face him directly. "Marcus Thompson, look at me. Do you know what I see when I look at you? I see a strong man who served his country. I see a talented composer who creates music that touches souls. I see someone who makes me laugh and thinks about others before himself." Marcus's eyes grew moist. "Sarah, my life isn't simple. There are days when everything is a struggle. Days when I can't even. And there are days when I can't hit the high notes," Sarah interrupted with a gentle smile. "Days when my students drive me crazy. Days when nothing goes right. That's life, Marcus. We all have our struggles. What matters is who we choose to share those struggles with." She reached out and took his hand. It was their first real physical contact, and Sarah felt warmth spread through her entire body. "You know," Marcus said softly, "I've been working on a new composition. It's about a woman who saw past all the barriers and straight into someone's soul." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I'd love to hear it someday." As they sat there in the quiet church basement, surrounded by sheet music and old hymnals, something shifted between them. The barriers others saw, race, disability, societal expectations, seemed to fade away, leaving just two hearts beating in harmony. Later that night, Sarah called Lisa. "Sis, I know you're worried, but some things in life you just know are right. This is one of them." And as she lay in bed that night, Sarah realized she wasn't just breaking down barriers for Marcus, he was helping her break free from her own fears and limitations too. As summer turned to fall, Sarah and Marcus's relationship grew stronger with each passing day. They had fallen into a comfortable routine, meeting not just at the music appreciation group, but also for coffee after Sunday services and quiet dinners at the small diner near the church. One crisp October evening, they sat in Marcus's small but tidy living room. Sarah had brought over her favorite gospel records, and they were listening to them together. The dim lamp cast a warm glow across the room as old spirituals filled the air. "Tell me about the day it happened," Sarah said softly, sitting on the couch next to his wheelchair. She had never asked before. Something about the quiet intimacy of the moment gave her courage. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting still in his lap. "It was a routine patrol in Afghanistan," he finally said. "We'd done it 100 times before. But that day, we hit an IED. He paused, taking a deep breath. I remember the sound, the heat, and then Nothing. Woke up in a hospital 2 weeks later. Doctors said I'd never walk again. Sarah reached out and took his hand, saying nothing, just listening. The hardest part wasn't the injury, Marcus continued. It was coming home. People looked at me differently. Some old friends stopped calling. Even my fiancée at the time. She tried, but after 6 months she left. Sarah felt her heart tighten. Her loss, she said firmly. Marcus smiled, squeezing her hand. You know what kept me going? Music. I couldn't play piano anymore, not like before, but I could still hear the melodies in my head, still write them down. Music doesn't care if you can walk or not. Tell me about your first composition after the injury, Sarah encouraged. It was angry at first, Marcus admitted. All discord and harsh notes. But then, slowly, it changed, became something about hope, about finding new ways to live. He looked at her intently. Kind of like what's happening now with you. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. You know, she said, I've had my own struggles too. Growing up, people had all sorts of ideas about who I should be, what I should do. Being a black woman in our community, everyone had expectations. Like what? Marcus asked. Oh, marry a successful businessman from church. Have the perfect family. Be the proper pastor's wife. Sarah laughed softly. Instead, here I am, falling in love with a composer in a wheelchair who makes my heart sing better than any hymn ever could. The words had slipped out naturally, and for a moment, both of them sat in stunned silence. It was the first time either had mentioned love. Marcus wheeled his chair closer to the couch. Sarah Johnson, did you just say you're falling in love with me? Sarah lifted her chin, her eyes meeting his. Yes, Marcus Thompson, I believe I did. Got a problem with that? Instead of answering, Marcus reached into his side drawer and pulled out a piece of sheet music. I've been working on this for weeks. It's called Sarah's Song. He handed it to her, his hand slightly shaking. As Sarah read through the notes, tears began to fill her eyes. The melody was beautiful, weaving together elements of gospel and classical music, creating something entirely new and profound. This is how I hear you, Marcus said quietly, strong, graceful, full of joy and faith, but also not afraid of the deep notes, the challenging parts. Sarah stood up and walked to Marcus's old piano in the corner. May I? He nodded, and she began to play his composition. The music filled the room, speaking all the words they hadn't yet said. When she finished, there were tears on both their faces. I love you too, Sarah, Marcus said simply. I've been afraid to say it because, well, loving me comes with complications. Sarah walked back to him, knelt beside his wheelchair, and took both his hands in hers. Love is always complicated, Marcus. But this? Us. It's the most natural thing in the world to me. That evening marked a turning point in their relationship. As Sarah drove home later, she found herself singing along with the radio, her heart fuller than it had ever been. She knew people might not understand their love, but she also knew that some things in life were worth fighting for. And what she and Marcus had found together was definitely one of them. The annual Christmas concert at New Hope Baptist Church was Sarah's biggest event of the year. She had spent months preparing the tour, selecting the perfect songs, and making sure every note would be perfect. What she didn't know was that Marcus had been doing some preparing of his own. The church was packed that evening, decorated with twinkling lights and red poinsettias. Sarah stood before her choir in a beautiful red dress, her hands raised as she prepared to lead them in their first psalm. From his usual spot in the front row, Marcus watched her with a secret smile. The concert began beautifully. The choir's voices filled the church with joy, and Sarah's solo brought tears to many eyes. As they reached what should have been the final song, Sarah noticed some of her choir members exchanging knowing looks. Suddenly, the church pianist began playing a familiar melody. It was Sarah's song, the piece Marcus had written for her. Before Sarah could turn around in confusion, she heard the sound of wheels moving behind her. Marcus had quietly wheeled himself onto the stage, with help from Sarah's brother James. In his lap was a small keyboard, which he carefully set up on a stand that James brought out. Sarah, Marcus spoke into a microphone that someone handed him, his voice echoing through the church. When I first came to this church, I was a broken man who thought his music had died with his ability to walk. But then I met you. Sarah stood frozen, her hand over her heart. as Marcus began to play Sarah's song on the keyboard. But this time it had words, words she had never heard before. In darkness I was lost, until your voice showed me light. Your love gave me strength to see beyond my plight. Through music we found love, a love so pure and true. Sarah, my heart sings only when it sings with you. As Marcus sang, his voice deep and rich, Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks. The choir softly joined in as background, creating a beautiful harmony that filled the entire church. When the song ended, James wheeled Marcus closer to Sarah. From his jacket pocket, Marcus pulled out a small velvet box. "Sarah Johnson," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "you saw me when others looked away. You heard my music when I thought it was silence forever. You loved me not despite who I am, but because of who I am." The entire church was silent, holding its collective breath. Even those who had once doubted their relationship were wiping away tears. "I may not be able to get down on one knee," Marcus continued, opening the box to reveal a beautiful diamond ring, "but I can promise you my whole heart, my endless love, and a lifetime of making music together. Will you marry me?" Sarah could barely see through her tears. She looked at Marcus, remembering their first meeting, their music appreciation sessions, their quiet evenings together, and all the moments that had led to this one. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The church erupted in applause and cheers as Sarah leaned down to embrace Marcus. He slipped the ring onto her finger with slightly trembling hands, and she kissed him, not caring that the whole congregation was watching. The choir spontaneously burst into "Oh Happy Day," and soon the entire church was singing along. Sarah's family rushed forward to hug them both, including Lisa, who whispered in Sarah's ear, "I was wrong about him, sis. You two were meant to be." Later that night, at a small celebration in the church hall, Sarah sat next to Marcus, admiring her ring. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. Marcus grinned. "Remember all those extra choir practices you had this month? I was actually meeting with your choir members, teaching them the harmony for the proposal song. So everyone knew except me. Even your parents. Your dad helped me pick out the ring." Sarah leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder, overwhelmed with joy. The church hall was filled with their friends and family, all celebrating their love. In that moment, she knew that every challenge they had faced and would face was worth it. As the evening wound down, Marcus played Sarah's song one more time, and they sang it together, their voices blending perfectly, just like their lives would soon be. The months following the proposal flew by in a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Sarah and Marcus had decided on a June wedding, when the church garden would be in full bloom. But planning a wedding, they soon discovered, came with its own unique challenges. One sunny morning, Sarah and Marcus visited their dream venue, the beautiful Garden Grove Event Center. The owner, Mrs. Peterson, greeted them warmly until she saw Marcus's wheelchair. "Oh," Mrs. Peterson said, her smile faltering, "I'm not sure if our venue is equipped for your situation." Sarah felt her temper rising, but Marcus gently touched her hand. "Would you mind showing us around anyway?" he asked politely. "Perhaps we can find solutions together." As they toured the venue, Marcus pointed out simple modifications that could work: a temporary ramp here, a slight rearrangement of tables there. By the end of the tour, Mrs. Peterson was enthusiastically sketching out plans to make her venue more accessible. "You handled that so well," Sarah said afterward as they sat in her car. Marcus smiled. "Sometimes people just need a chance to open their minds. Besides, I have something more important to tell you." He pulled out his phone, showing her an email. "I've been accepted into an experimental medical program at City Hospital." Sarah read the email, her eyes widening. "Marcus, this sounds intense. 6 months of intensive therapy and treatments. The doctors say there's a chance that I might be able to stand, maybe even take a few steps." His voice was careful, measured. "I don't want to get my hopes too high, but—" Sarah squeezed his hand. "When do you start?" "Next week. But Sarah, I don't want this to interfere with our wedding plans." "Hey, you focus on your treatment. I can handle the planning." She paused. "But promise me one thing. No pushing yourself too hard." Meanwhile, wedding preparations continued. Sarah's mother helped her find the perfect dress, and her church family rallied around them. The chore insisted on performing at the ceremony, practicing special arrangements of their favorite songs. One evening, while reviewing their guest list at Marcus's apartment, Sarah noticed he seemed distracted. "What's on your mind?" Marcus wheeled himself to the window. "The therapy sessions. They're harder than I expected. Some days I feel like I'm making progress. Other days," he turned to face her. "Sarah, what if it doesn't work? What if I can't?" Sarah knelt beside his wheelchair. "Marcus Thompson, are you having second thoughts about marrying me?" "Never," he said firmly. I want to be the man you deserve." "You already are," Sarah replied. "Whether you're in this chair or dancing down the aisle, you're the man I love, the man who makes my heart sing. Nothing will ever change that." Later that week, Sarah visited the hospital during one of Marcus's therapy sessions. She watched through the window as he worked with the physical therapists, determination etched on his face. A doctor approached her. "Your fiancé is making remarkable progress," the doctor said. "His determination is extraordinary." "That's Marcus," Sarah replied proudly. "When he sets his mind to something." Back at home, Sarah worked on wedding details while Marcus attended his daily therapy sessions. She chose flowers that would complement both their church and the Garden Grove venue. She selected music that blended their favorite gospel songs with classical pieces Marcus had composed. One night, after a particularly tough therapy session, Marcus called Sarah. "I need you to trust me about something," he said. "Always. I want to add something special to our wedding ceremony, but I need it to be a surprise, even from you." Sarah laughed. "Is this going to be like your proposal surprise?" "Even better," Marcus promised. "Just know that everything I'm doing, all this therapy, it's all part of something bigger." As she hung up the phone, Sarah looked at their wedding invitation on her desk. In 6 weeks, they would be married. Despite all the challenges, despite what some people might think or say, their love had only grown stronger. That night, Sarah added one more item to her wedding planning notebook: trust in Marcus's surprise. Whatever he was planning, she knew it would be worth the wait. The morning of June 15th arrived with perfect blue skies and a gentle breeze. Sarah stood at the window of her church's bridal room, watching early guests arrive at the Garden Grove Event Center next door. Her white dress sparkled in the sunlight, and her mother had just finished pinning fresh flowers in her hair. "You look like an angel," Lisa said, helping to adjust her sister's veil. "Marcus is going to cry when he sees you." Sarah smiled, thinking of her soon-to-be husband. She hadn't seen him for 2 days. He'd insisted on following the tradition of keeping apart before the wedding. His therapy sessions had continued right up until yesterday, but he wouldn't tell her anything about his progress. In another room, Marcus sat in his wheelchair, adjusting his bow tie. His best man, James, Sarah's brother, helped him into his black suit jacket. "You ready for this?" James asked, noticing Marcus's hands trembling slightly. "More ready than I've ever been for anything," Marcus replied. He patted the pocket of his jacket, making sure the folded paper was still there, the special song he'd written for today. The garden was beautifully decorated. White chairs lined both sides of a flower-covered aisle, with a special smooth pathway down the middle for Marcus's wheelchair. The chore stood ready, dressed in royal blue robes that swayed in the breeze. At exactly noon, the music began. The wedding party walked down the aisle. First the bridesmaids in blue dresses, then the flower girls spreading rose petals. Marcus wheeled himself to his place at the altar, looking handsome and nervous in his black suit. Then the music changed to a special arrangement of Sarah's song, and everyone stood. Sarah appeared at the garden entrance on her father's arm, and a collective gasp went through the crowd. She was radiant, her smile brighter than the summer sun. As she walked down the aisle, Sarah's eyes never left Marcus. She saw tears glistening in his eyes, matching the ones in her own. When she reached him, she leaned down to kiss his cheek before taking her place beside him. The pastor began the ceremony, speaking about love that overcomes all obstacles. The chore sang softly in the background, their harmonies floating on the summer breeze. Then came time for their special duet, the moment Marcus had been preparing for months. Sarah turned to face Marcus, ready to sing their song together. But what happened next made her forget every word she knew. Marcus pressed a small button on his wheelchair. Slowly, carefully, supported by a hidden brace under his suit, he began to rise. A gasp went through the crowd. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "My dear Sarah," Marcus said, his voice shaking but strong, "I promised myself that when this day came, I would stand beside you as your equal." He was now fully standing, supported by the brace but upright for the first time since she'd known him. The guests watched in amazed silence as Marcus, instead of singing their planned duet, began to sing a new song he'd written. "They said I'd never stand again, but love gave me the strength to rise. Your faith in me, my guiding light, helped me reach for brighter skies. Today I stand before you, love, not just in spirit, but in form. To show you that with you beside me, any mountain can be conquered, any storm." Sarah couldn't hold back her sobs of joy. She stepped forward, supporting Marcus as they sang together, their voices joining in perfect harmony. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. When they exchanged their vows, Marcus remained standing, though Sarah could see the effort it took. Their I-dos were clear and strong, ringing out across the garden. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor said, beaming. "You may kiss the bride." Marcus and Sarah's first kiss as a married couple was met with thunderous applause and cheers. The choir burst into a joyous gospel song, and flower petals rained down from baskets held by children in the trees. As Marcus carefully sat back in his wheelchair, Sarah leaned down to whisper in his ear, "You amazing, wonderful man. You've just given me the greatest gift I could ever imagine." Marcus took her hand, kissing it gently. "No, Sarah Thompson, you gave me the greatest gift. You gave me a reason to stand again." The wedding reception was in full swing at the Garden Grove Event Center. Fairy lights twinkled from every corner, and the room buzzed with excitement. Everyone was still talking about Marcus's surprise during the ceremony, but he had told them all, "Just wait. There's more to come." Sarah sat beside Marcus at the head table, still in happy shock from the ceremony. She couldn't stop looking at her new husband, who seemed to be gathering strength for something else. The DJ announced it was time for their first dance as husband and wife. "Marcus," Sarah whispered, "you've already done so much today. We don't have to." Marcus squeezed her hand. "Trust me, my love," he nodded to James, who walked to the center of the dance floor with a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," James announced, "the bride and groom have prepared something special. Sarah, would you please come to the center and sing your favorite gospel song?" Sarah looked confused but stood up, walking to where James waited. She took the microphone, looking back at Marcus with questioning eyes. The music began. It was Amazing Grace, the song she had been singing when they first met. As Sarah's voice filled the room with the familiar melody, something extraordinary began to happen. Marcus pressed the button on his wheelchair again, activating the special brace. But this time, he did more than just stand. With slow, careful steps, Marcus began walking toward Sarah. The room fell completely silent except for Sarah's voice, which broke with emotion but kept singing. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Step by step, Marcus moved forward. His doctors and physical therapists, who were among the wedding guests, watched with proud smiles. This was what he had been working toward all those months, not just standing, but walking to his bride. That saved a wretch like me. Sarah's tears flowed freely now, but she kept singing, understanding at last why Marcus had insisted she learn to sing this song in a lower key last week. He was planning to join her. "I once was lost, but now am found." Marcus reached her just as she sang these words. Taking her hand, he began to sing with her, his deep voice harmonizing perfectly. "Was blind, but now I see." They stood together in the center of the dance floor, singing the hymn that had brought them together. The tour members, who had been secretly prepared for this moment, joined in with perfect harmony, creating a sound that seemed to come from heaven itself. As the song ended, Marcus wrapped his arms around Sarah, and they began to sway gently to the music. It wasn't exactly dancing, he wasn't ready for that yet, but it was more than anyone had thought possible a year ago. The doctors said it might not last long today. Marcus whispered in her ear as they moved together. "The brace and therapy can only do so much, but I wanted to share this moment with you." Sarah held him tighter. "Every moment with you is a miracle, Marcus Thompson, whether you're sitting, standing, or dancing on the ceiling." Their guests watched in awe as the couple shared this intimate moment. Mrs. Peterson, the venue owner who had initially hesitated to host them, was openly weeping. Sarah's sister Lisa was filming everything, though her phone shook with her sobs of joy. After a few minutes, Marcus needed to return to his wheelchair, but as James helped him back, there wasn't a trace of sadness or disappointment on his face, only pure joy and triumph. The band struck up a lively gospel tune, and the dance floor filled with celebrating guests. Sarah sat beside Marcus, both of them watching their loved ones dance and laugh. "You know," Sarah said, leaning close to her husband, "when I first started falling in love with you, people said I was crazy. They said life would be too hard, too complicated." Marcus turned to her, his eyes shining. "And what do you think now?" Sarah smiled, taking his hand. "I think love doesn't care about what's hard or complicated. Love just wants to sing its song, and when it finds the right harmony." She squeezed his hand. "Well, you've shown everyone today what miracles that harmony can create." The reception continued late into the night, filled with music, laughter, and joy. And if anyone still doubted the power of Sarah and Marcus's love, they didn't anymore. They had witnessed a miracle born of faith, determination, and a love strong enough to make a man stand up and walk to his destiny. 1 year after their magical wedding day, Sarah and Marcus Thompson sat in their cozy living room, surrounded by photos from their special day. The largest picture showed them singing together on the dance floor, Marcus standing tall beside his bride. "Can you believe it's been a year already?" Sarah asked, placing a cup of tea on the table next to Marcus's wheelchair. Though he could now stand and take short walks with his brace, he still needed the chair most of the time. "Best year of my life," Marcus smiled, reaching for a folder on his lap. "And look what came today, the final approval for our music therapy center." Sarah's eyes lit up as she read the letter. Their dream was finally becoming reality. After their wedding story spread through the community, many people had reached out, asking how they could help others experience the healing power of music. The New Hope Music Therapy Center would open next month in a renovated building next to their church. They had designed it specially to help disabled veterans and others with physical challenges find healing through music, just as Marcus had. "Remember what you said when we first started planning this?" Sarah asked, sitting beside him. "You were worried no one would want to come to a music therapy center run by a man in a wheelchair." Marcus chuckled. "And you said that was exactly why they would come, because I understand their journey." Just then, their doorbell rang. Sarah opened the door to find James helping a young veteran up their front ramp. The young man, like Marcus, was in a wheelchair. "This is Mike," James said. "He heard about the new center and wanted to meet you both before it opens." Mike looked nervous but determined. "I lost my legs 6 months ago," he said quietly. "They say I'm supposed to be adjusting, but I feel lost. Then I saw the video of your wedding dance." Sarah watched as Marcus wheeled himself closer to Mike. "Let me guess. Everyone keeps telling you to stay positive, but some days you just want to scream?" Mike's eyes widened. "Exactly. And the nightmares." "Come on into my music room," Marcus said. "I want to show you something." Sarah watched them go, her heart full of pride. Marcus led Mike to the piano, where he had installed special pedal controls that allowed him to play from his wheelchair. "Music saved me twice," she heard Marcus say. "First when I was injured, and then when it led me to Sarah. Now, it's helping me save others." Over the next few hours, Sarah listened as Marcus shared his story with Mike, showing him how to use music to express feelings he couldn't put into words. By the time Mike left, he had already signed up to be one of their first students at the center. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Sarah noticed Marcus spending extra time doing his therapy exercises. "Don't overdo it, honey," she cautioned. "Just want to be ready for the center's opening," he replied. "I'm planning to stand for the ribbon-cutting ceremony." Sarah helped him into bed, then curled up beside him. "You know what I love most about our story?" she asked. "What's that?" "That it's not just about us anymore. It's about all the Mikes out there who need to know that life isn't over just because it's different than they planned." Marcus pulled her closer. "And it's about all the Sarahs who need to know that love doesn't see limitations. It sees possibilities." The next morning, they arrived early at the almost finished center. Workers were installing the sign, "New Hope Music Therapy Center, where healing harmonies begin." As they watched, a group of children from the church walked by on their way to Sunday school. Mrs. Thompson, one little girl called out, "Will you teach us to sing like angels?" "Of course, sweetie," Sarah smiled. And Mr. Thompson will teach you how to write your own songs too. Marcus squeezed her hand. You know, when I first came to this church, I thought my music days were over. Now look, we're building a whole center around music and healing. Sarah leaned down to kiss him. That's because you were brave enough to let love sing a new song in your heart. As they watched the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant colors, they knew their story was far from over. It was just beginning a beautiful new chapter, one that would help others find their own healing harmonies, just as they had found theirs.